Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, one of the world's leading stargazers is not convinced that Congress was shown a video of a real UFO last week, but he has his sights set on deep space and thinks they might have found something.
And following the murder of a Ukrainian refugee on the North Carolina train, I'm going to look at the problem of mental illness, homelessness and crime. But first,
the man accused of killing conservative activist Charlie Kirk made his first appearance via video link in a Utah court this week to be formally charged.
Calling case 251-403-576, State of Utah versus Tyler James Robinson. Could you state your name?
Tyler James Robinson.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Robinson. I'm Judge Graff.
After the terrible violence of Kirk's death and the outrage that followed, it was a strikingly measured, even mundane affair in court. Earlier, Utah County Attorney General Jeff Gray had outlined the exact charges against Robinson.
Count 1, aggravated murder, a capital offense. Count 2, felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, a first-degree felony.
Utah officials are seeking the death penalty in this case, and the charging documents make for what seems, at this stage at least, very much like an open and shut case.
DNA consistent with Robinson was found on the rifle's trigger. After shooting Mr. Kirk, Robinson hid the gun, discarded the clothing he wore when he fired the rifle, and told his roommate to delete incriminating text messages and not talk to police.
Those text messages include what appears to be a confession to his partner. Meanwhile, the extraordinary public mourning of Charlie Kirk continued. His funeral is this weekend at the State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. Speakers will include his widow, Erica, and a remarkable array of conservative leaders. President Trump, Vice President Vance, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio will speak, as will fellow Cabinet Secretaries Kennedy and Hegseth, the Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, Donald Trump Jr, and fellow conservative commentator Tucker Carlson, among others. All of that for a 31-year-old activist and broadcaster. And underscoring Kirk's power and influence in Trump world, Vice President Vance hosted Kirk's podcast this week.
This is the Charlie Kirk Show. Buckle up. Here we go.
Hey, everybody. JD Vance here, live from my office in the White House complex and filling in for somebody who cannot be filled in for, but I'm going to try to do my best. My dear friend, the great Charlie Kirk.
At times, this program felt more like Awake, friends of Kirk's sharing stories, coming to terms with what's happened. But when Deputy Chief of Staff to the President, Stephen Miller, sat down for a chat with Vance, things took a decidedly darker turn.
The last message that Charlie sent me was, I think it was just the day before we lost him, which is that we need to have an organized strategy to go after the left-wing organizations that are promoting violence in this country. And I will write those words onto my heart and I will carry them out.
A lot of suspicions, Chaz, but we still do not know the motive or indeed the political leanings of Kirk's killer. Miller alleged, though, that it was a killing as a result of a vast left-wing conspiracy to terrorise conservatives.
The thing about anger is that unfocused anger or blind rage is not a productive emotion.
Right.
But focused anger, righteous anger, directed for a just cause is one of the most important agents of change in human history.
Charlie showed that. Amen.
And we are going to channel all of the anger that we have over the organized campaign that led to this assassination to uproot and dismantle these terrorist networks.
So he literally there, Chaz, said in as many words, we are going to use the anger over this killing to do something that I was talking with him about doing before he was killed. This is something that they've had on the shelf for a while.
they definitely have had this on the shelf for a while. Although you said before that, that we still don't know the political leanings of Kirk's killer for sure. Well, the Attorney General in Utah seems to have a view at the very least.
Robinson's mother explained that over the last year or so, Robinson had become more political and had started to lean more to the left, becoming more pro-gay and trans rights oriented.
Now, that doesn't mean Robinson is a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. He didn't even vote in the 2024 election, so he can't be that into it. But he does seem to at least have a more left-wing view of gender.
Yes, certainly in the context of Utah, for sure.
Yes, and that could provide a potential motive, at least according to those text messages you referred to before, between Robinson and his partner. His partner asked why he killed Kirk, and Robinson replied, "I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out." So that seems like a clear motive right there, Charlie Kirk's rhetoric about trans people, if you believe the text messages. The reason why I say that is because pretty much the only thing that unites activists across the ideological spectrum on social media at the moment is a belief that those text messages might be faked up. Steve Bannon on the right said, "I'm particularly not buying those text messages. It just seems too stilted, too much like a script." On the left, Tweeter Brooklyn Dad Defiant wrote, "I don't believe these text messages were written by Tyler Robinson for a second. I didn't know him personally, but I know that no 22-year-old writes text messages like this. This feels like that Steve Buscemi skateboard meme, 'How do you do, fellow kids?'" And just to be clear, why some people think those text messages could be faked up is if Tyler Robinson is trying to provide cover for his partner, let's say his partner did actually know he was going to go through with the shooting, which wouldn't be an amazing surprise if he did, and Robinson didn't want her charged as an accessory. "Oh, I just wanted you to know that I committed this crime and never told you about it. I'm texting you so the police can see." I don't know if that's true, but that's why some people are suspicious.
Yeah, it's understandable that there are suspicions about that. That is just evidence that is being put forward in the charging documents. It is untested evidence. Presumably, the partner of the alleged assassin is going to be called to give witness testimony in court. That's why we hold court cases, even though there's a rush to judgment and a lot of evidence that incriminates Tyler Robinson. There is this question of, was there any level of conspiracy? Did he act alone? And is there anything to justify the allegations that are being made that this is a part of something that goes all the way up to George Soros? JD Vance continued on his show. The Vice President launched into an emotional tirade against the entire political left. While on the one hand he was calling for unity, he was also calling for retribution against left-wing organisations and anybody right now who dares to criticise Charlie Kirk.
Did you know that the George Soros Open Society Foundation and the Ford Foundation, the groups who funded that disgusting article justifying Charlie's death, do you know they benefit from generous tax treatment? They are literally subsidized by you and me, the American taxpayer. And how do they reward us? By setting fire to the house built by the American family over 250 years.
The Vice President was outraged there at the disgusting article in The Nation magazine. This is by columnist Elizabeth Spires, who wrote that Charlie Kirk was, in her view, an unrepentant racist, transphobe, homophobe and misogynist who often wrapped his bigotry in Bible verses because there was no other way to pretend that it was morally correct. After JD Vance threatened to take away their tax-exempt status, Spires posted on Blue Sky that she wasn't paid by the Ford Foundation or the Soros Open Society to write this column. She then turned around and accused JD Vance of, not for the first time, spouting conspiracy theories involving the Soroses to deflect criticism. And for what it's worth, the Washington Post also reported that neither group appears to have provided any money to The Nation magazine in the last 5 years. So this is talk of retribution against donors who did not donate in the last 5 years. It doesn't really make sense. There's no talk currently of The Nation sacking Spires as a columnist, although others haven't been so lucky. As we reported on Monday, Matthew Dowd, the former chief strategist for the 2004 Bush-Cheney Republican presidential campaign, was sacked from MSNBC for this appraisal of Charlie Kirk.
Hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions.
The Washington Post, meanwhile, has sacked global opinions editor Karen Attiah for expressing her opinions about gun violence and on Charlie Kirk on social media. The only direct reference she made to Kirk was to quote him as saying that black women, quote, do not have the brain processing power to be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot. That sounded pretty bad. It was an accurate quote, but the context was a distortion. He was talking specifically there about Michelle Obama, Joy Reid, Sheila Jackson-Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson. All of them are black women, but Kirk was not saying in that quote that all black women lack the brain power.
I think you described the mistake correctly there, John, but I got to say, I think it's worse than just a mild mistake. I think it's a really bad one. Like, what she's done there is she's literally doctored a quote. Like, the back half of the quote is accurate, but the front half of the quote, where she says black women, instead of listing the 4 people he was actually speaking about, makes it seem like he's criticising all black women as being stupid. And she's a journalist. Like you shouldn't be inventing things inside quote marks. Now, I didn't like the comment. I thought the comment was appalling from Charlie Kirk, but you've got to be accurate when you put things in quote marks. And the thing which I'm most offended by, we all make mistakes. I've done it too, right? Sure. But 3 days later, after she's been sacked, she's writing Substacks talking about her little journey there. And when she refers to this, she says, "My only direct reference to Kirk was one post, his own words on record." She's still not admitting that she misquoted him. Now, as someone who consumes news, I'm never going to trust her again. If I see a quote from her, I'm going to look it up because she just can't be trusted. And I don't think that's acceptable for a journalist. I wouldn't necessarily have sacked her. Yeah. I might have reprimanded her and given her a warning. But that was, I thought, appalling behaviour.
Well, here's the one that everyone's talking about this week. It involves ABC America's late-night comedian Jimmy Kimmel. He's been taken off the air indefinitely this week for this.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger-pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House.
Yes. He's at the 4th stage of grief, construction. Demolition, construction.
Now, we had a chuckle on Monday night's Planet America about that seemingly strange pivot where President Trump is asked how he feels about Charlie Kirk, and very quickly he's talking about the ballroom.
Yes.
It was odd. Yeah. Was it insensitive for Kimmel to point out the oddness of it, or for us to do it? Fortunately, ABC Australia has more forgiving bosses, perhaps. But the Federal Communications Commissioner then waded in. This is Brendan Carr. He was far from amused at Kimmel's jokes there. He said it was a part of a concerted effort to lie to the American people about the beliefs of Mr. Kirk's killer, suggesting that the companies that own ABC and its affiliated stations find ways to change conduct and take action on Kimmel. Before he warned, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead, implying perhaps that he could actually withhold the broadcast licences from those affiliates. That was enough for those affiliates then to say to head office, well, we're dropping Jimmy Kimmel. So the network then said, OK, we're taking him off air. We don't want you to do that. Donald Trump was clearly quite chuffed. He was tweeting from Windsor Castle, calling for more sackings.
Great news for America. The ratings challenge Jimmy Kimmel Show is cancelled. Congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done. Kimmel has 0 talent and worse ratings than even Colbert, if that's possible. That leaves Jimmy and Seth 2 total losers on fake news. NBC. Their ratings are also horrible. Do it, NBC. President DJT.
We're kind of used to this now, but the President of the United States calling for the sacking of late-night TV hosts because they joke about him. To some, that's ridiculous. To others, that is what fascists and authoritarians tend to do, and it's something that we should be really concerned about. But this is all happening over the death of somebody who's consistently being held up as a champion of free speech, Charlie Kirk, and whose more controversial comments, whether they're being accurately quoted or not, are being held up as the exercise of free speech. This is kind of as ironic as it is troubling to me.
Certainly ironic, although remember he did have his little cancel list of professors at one point in time. So even Saint Charlie Kirk cancelled people at some point in time. But having said all that, I just went back over what Jimmy Kimmel supposedly did. I don't think it was so much the ballroom comment. It was the very first line where he implied that MAGA people were trying to distance themselves as far as they could from the shooter, which was accurate.
Demonstrably true.
Everyone was.
Everyone's trying to distance themselves
right.
from this guy. Nobody wants to be his reason for doing this.
He never even said that he was MAGA. It was implied, but he never said it.
Right.
And Jimmy Kimmel's not a news show.
Right.
so these are all reasons why this is a very strange line to draw and be offended by. These were lies, which is what Brendan Carr was suggesting.
Yeah, and there's no doubt Jimmy Kimmel is an out-and-out Democrat. He was hosting that infamous appearance with Joe Biden and Barack Obama last year when Joe Biden needed to be sort of guided off the stage by Obama. Kimmel doesn't like Trump. He rails against him. But he's so far had an audience that has been big enough to justify that, because a lot of these late night shows have become a lot more political in the last 10 or 15 years or so. Probably just, to stay relevant. Johnny Carson didn't make the kinds of jokes that Kimmel and Colbert do, but this has become what those shows do now.
Yeah, having said all that, while I think it's a pretty lame thing to pick Jimmy Kimmel up on, they've got the right to do that. Private TV stations, if they don't want to run Jimmy Kimmel, they're offended by something he says, then they can not run it. That's fine. That's part of free speech.
Sure.
Part of free speech is that other people have the freedom to not indulge your speech.
Except they're effectively being blackmailed by the FCC.
This is where I have a problem. My problem, if those TV stations on their own said we're just not going to run it, that's fine.
Yeah.
But let's be very clear what happened here. On Monday night, Jimmy Kimmel ran that monologue. On Tuesday, nothing happened. On Wednesday, Brendan Carr gave that interview, and an hour later, Jimmy Kimmel sacked. In that interview, Brendan Carr explicitly threatened the TV stations that were running Jimmy Carr. Explicitly threatened them.
Jimmy Kimmel.
Jimmy Kimmel. Sorry. Brendan Carr, Jimmy Kimmel.
We'll get to him next.
Brendan Carr explicitly threatened those TV stations. And you got to remember that the owner of all those TV stations, Nexstar, is currently applying for a $6 billion merger with with a bunch of other TV stations, and the FCC has to approve it.
That's the leverage.
Brendan Carr has to approve it. And Brendan Carr just said, you better sack Jimmy Kimmel, and then they immediately sacked Jimmy Kimmel. What that's telling me is a government agency bullied them into sacking Jimmy Kimmel, which is a breach of the First Amendment, a breach of free speech, and a shocker.
It's the same playbook that we've seen when it comes to the Justice Department, the attacks on the universities, use whatever leverage in. We saw it with the ABC's own John Lyons this week. What is the pressure point that you can apply? Trump said, it's relations with Australia. Whoa, you're damaging Australia. I mean, it's a gift, and it's working at the moment.
It is.
Well, on Monday night's Planet America, we reported on that US House Oversight Committee task force on the declassification of federal secrets, and the hearing that they held last week into what we used to call UFOs, we now call UAPs.
Shocking witness testimony.
It stopped about 100 feet in front of me and approximately 100 feet above me. My telephone got extremely hot, completely froze.
From whistleblowers who served in the military.
Chaos ensued over the radio as the object approached rapidly. I heard my friends screaming, "It's coming right at us. It's coming right for us."
People demand answers.
There is something out there, and we should know as the people what it is.
The hearing was enough to convince some lawmakers who were once skeptics.
The most eye-catching video evidence was presented by Republican Congressman Eric Burleson of Missouri.
This video is of an MQ-9 drone tracking an orb, or this object, off the coast of Yemen. You'll see that another MQ-9 launched a Hellfire missile.
That vision prompted reactions from expert witnesses like this.
But that's a Hellfire missile smacking into that UFO and just bounced right off. And it kept going.
It kept going, and it looks like the debris was taken with it.
Yeah, what the hell is that? What flies like that?
Again, I'm not going to speculate what it is, but the question is, why are we being blocked from this information?
But we can speculate as to what it is because according to a leading astrophysicist, there's probably a pretty mundane explanation. Professor Avi Loeb was the longest-serving head of Harvard University's Department of Astronomy. He now runs the Galileo project, which is searching for evidence of interstellar life. He supports those calls for greater openness from government, but he doubts that particular video showed a UFO. Professor Loeb, welcome to Planet America. Several of the witnesses before Congress last week admitted to being frightened by seeing a Hellfire missile appear to bounce off that unidentified object. But you think that you've come up with a rather less frightening explanation.
Yes, I mean, one may regard any weapon as frightening. That is not an indication that it's extraterrestrial. In fact, I thought that it's much more likely that the explanation is very terrestrial because this recording was done near Yemen, where the Houthis at that time were launching drones towards southern Israel. And the speed and the size of the object that is called the unidentified anomalous phenomenon matches the characteristic size and speed of drones or any other equipment that they may have used at the time. And we know that because there was contact between this object and the Hellfire missile. So you just go online and check the properties of a Hellfire missile, the size and the speed of it, and you see that it was moving about 6 times faster than the object itself, and was also bigger by a certain factor than the object, and you can figure out the parameters of the object. And it matches that of drones, and one may conclude that the Americans shot a Hellfire missile at an object that perhaps was not clear to them what it might be from the imagery, but it was probably launched by the Houthis.
Those descriptions, Professor, of the witnesses saying that the Hellfire missile split as it hit this object, I mean, clearly Hellfire missiles are not meant to split. They're meant to explode.
Right. In fact, it's an anti-tank weapon, and upon impact, it's supposed to explode. And apparently, this contact did not trigger the explosion. So my guess is that it probably touched the periphery of the object, perhaps with its wings, or it touched the wings of the object, and some parts fell apart. I'm not sure where they came from, most likely from whatever periphery of the object was destroyed. But the fact of the matter is that it doesn't need to be extraterrestrial in origin. We don't see any motion that makes this object different from the performance envelopes of known drones. So, if it walks like a duck and it looks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Right. But if there is such a simple explanation to all of this, was it wrong to show that vision to Congress and indeed the world by saying, well, what the heck is this? Or did it serve some other purpose to put it out there?
No, I think it was just looked at without enough scrutiny, without trying to figure out if it could be explained in simpler terms. And I agree that it should not have been presented before such a study is done. There might be much better data. And in fact, the eyewitnesses talked about the experiences that go well beyond what we just discussed and could not have been reproduced by non-human-made technologies. So if we can get data on those experiences that the scientists can analyze, that would be fantastic. And I will be happy to help the US government figure out these objects, because there are 2 possibilities. Either they're manufactured by adversarial nations, or they represent something else beyond this earth. And in the first case, I would feel quite honored to help national security, which is a very important subject. In the second case, it will be a major breakthrough in science, and that is just the icing on the cake.
And Professor, of the witness accounts that Congress has heard, the video evidence that's been circulating online in the last decade or so, including the now famous US Navy Tic Tac video, what of what you have read and seen has really piqued your interest? Have you looked at any of that and said, I don't think that is necessarily from Earth?
Well, the thing is that we don't have access to high-quality scientific data. It may well be that the US government has that and it's classified, and I would love to see it. We can wait for the US government to declassify that information the way it was advocated at the hearing. The purpose is to release things, which are not of immediate national security importance that scientists can look into. But in the absence of that, I'm leading the Galileo project at Harvard University, which constructed 3 observatories, one in Massachusetts, another one in Pennsylvania, and a third one in Nevada. And we are looking at the entire sky at all times and trying to search for any anomalous objects that are not human-made or not natural. And we are using machine learning software to do that. To me, it sounds like the most sensible thing to do. If these objects are out there, we should be able to find them and get the high-quality data on them. And if they're not there, the Department of Defense, or now it's called the Department of War, can potentially use the sensors and the algorithms that we are using for the defense of the country. So I wouldn't feel that my time is wasted as a scientist.
What can you tell us about the interstellar deep space object that you're currently tracking with the Galileo program? And are there anything that you're seeing there that you think, maybe that's not just a comet or a big funny shaped rock or something? Maybe that is some kind of machine from somewhere else.
In 2017, there was an object that was named the Oumuamua, discovered by a telescope in Hawaii. This name means a scout in the Hawaiian language. It was anomalous. It was most likely flat and was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without showing any cometary evaporation, no gas or dust around it. So it was not a comet, but somehow it was pushed away from the sun. And just recently, on July 1st, 2025, the third object from interstellar space was discovered from outside the solar system. We know that because both of these objects were moving too fast to be bound by gravity to the sun. In between them, there was a comet from interstellar space that looked just like the comets in our solar system, therefore nothing unusual about it. But this third object, 3I Atlas, discovered by a telescope in Chile called Atlas, was anomalous again for a different reason. First, it looks like it's very big in its size compared to the previous two, significantly big, could be up to a factor of 10,000 or a million, the mass of the first two. But moreover, its trajectory lies in the plane of the planets around the sun, as if it was planned to come close to the planets, like in a reconnaissance operation. And in addition, we see a plume of gas around it that contains nickel without iron. And the only place where we know that nickel without iron exists is when we make nickel alloys in the industries. And as always in science, we could either realize that it's a rock, a natural object, in which case I would give it a rank of 0 on a scale that I defined. It's called now the Loeb scale. Or if it turns out to be technological, it will rank closer to 10 on my scale. And then we have to pay a lot of attention to it, because it's like having a visitor in your backyard, and you have to worry about whether the visitor will show up in the front door, or, you don't have the luxury of responding to a signal, a radio signal from thousands of light years away at your leisure.
Before Charlie Kirk was shot, the whole of America was talking about a different crime entirely, involving a 23-year-old Ukraine refugee being stabbed to death on a Charlotte light rail train.
But then, the unthinkable happens. You see Brown pull out what officials say was a pocket knife. He unfolds it, then stands up behind Zarutska. What we aren't showing you is the moment where Brown then stabs Zarutska several times, then walks away. Here you can see Brown trying to get off the train, and then a few people spring into action, attempting to save Zarutska. She would die from her injuries.
Iryna Zarutska was stabbed by this man, Decarlos Brown Jr. The reason people were generally outraged, in the words of Donald Trump, was that Brown had been previously arrested and released on cashless bail back in January, and in fact he'd been arrested 14 times before. So, as Trump asked, what the hell was he doing riding the train and walking the streets? Criminals like this need to be locked up, Trump said. However, it's not that simple, because almost all of those 14 arrests were quite minor and they were over a decade ago. The big charge that Brown faced was robbery with a dangerous weapon back in 2014, for which he was sentenced to a little more than 6 years in jail. He served that sentence completely and then he was released. Since then, he's only been arrested once for misusing the 911 emergency line. You see, Brown has a history of mental illness, and he told officers that he believed someone gave him man-made material that controlled when he ate, walked and talked. Now, he was released without bail for, well, quite understandably a minor crime there. But even if the judge had thrown the book at Brown, there's no way he'd still be incarcerated on August 22, because the maximum sentence for that crime is 120 days. So he would have been back on the streets by June 2025, no matter what the courts did. He would have been able to stab that Ukrainian refugee regardless. By contrast, I do think there's a better question to ask. Brown's mother says that after her son was released from prison in 2020, he was different. And he began showing violent behaviour like slamming doors and yelling in her face. She said he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and had been given medication to take, but he refused to take his medication. She took him to a mental health hospital, but they didn't have enough room, and they said because he wasn't threatening to hurt himself, they couldn't take him anyway. The hospital told her, you can't make a person come to the facility. And that, I think, is the better question. Why can't you make a person go to a mental health facility if they need the help? I spoke to Freddie DeBoer. He's a writer who suffers from bipolar disorder, and he credits his involuntary commitment with saving his life. I asked Freddie about his personal experience and how it informed his views.
I have bipolar disorder, bipolar 1. I was first diagnosed in 2002 when I was 20 years old, when I had my first psychotic disorder, my first psychotic break, that is, from the mania period of a bipolar cycle. When that happened, I had been getting worse and worse over a long time period, as tends to happen with bipolar disorder. I got into an argument with a neighbor of mine in which I was quite incoherent. Another neighbor called the police. They took me to the local hospital. I was given a dose of a injectable antipsychotic, and I was brought to the local state psychiatric hospital, where I began what was at first a 3-day involuntary commitment, but then I ended up staying for another 3 weeks. And I then proceeded to have kind of a very typical bipolar life, which is to say, I spent a lot of years falling out of treatment, convincing myself that I was cured, or living in denial of the fact that I had it at all, deciding that I could now manage my disorder with willpower, etc. Using a lot of drugs and drinking a lot and living a kind of dissolute lifestyle. And finally, in 2017, I had a big public meltdown, which created a great deal of professional strain for me, ruined a lot of relationships. And I finally realized that I couldn't keep doing this anymore. And I got into treatment for good, and I have been medicated and in treatment continuously now for 8 years.
And can you really effectively treat someone if they don't want to be there?
You can keep someone from being in the position where they're going to kill themselves, kill someone else, or ruin their own life. I mean, I think that it's really important to say that at the root of involuntary commitment is simply removing someone from the situation in which they might potentially jeopardize their life, lose their life, or simply ruin their life. For example, I have always felt quite confident that if I had continued to go down the road I was going in 2002, my first psychotic break was the most intense, which is fairly typical, I'm quite confident that I would have killed myself if I had not been forced into treatment. And there's also no way that I ever would have been talked into treatment by anyone, because what dominates my own disorder is intense paranoia and my belief that people are trying to kill me or out to get me, which makes it extremely difficult for anyone to talk me into doing anything. So there's that sort of first order need to prevent people from immediate harm and from doing immediate harm. And then, even though it took me 15 years to really get with the program, I am a success story of involuntary commitment. As I said, after my initial period on an involuntary hold, I transitioned into a voluntary hold, and that was where I began to sort of learn about myself and my disorder. And I think there's more people like me than you might think.
So how do you think this should work? What should be the process by which a person could end up in involuntary treatment?
I would just return to a standard that has something to do with the actual medical expertise of psychiatrists, right? So these orders to commit people are generally, and there is some variation between the states, I should say, but these orders to commit people are generally being made by psychiatrists who have to assess these patients, often in not ideal circumstances to do so. And they have to do essentially a kind of mind reading or a kind of soothsaying, right? A psychiatrist has no ability really to know if a psychotic person is going to commit a crime, a violent crime, or if they're going to commit suicide. Instead, we should shift the standard to reflect degrees of impairment, to allow a psychiatrist to say, according to my best judgment, based on my knowledge of mental health and mental illness, which is what obviously the actual expertise of a psychiatrist is evaluating mental health and mental illness. I deem this person to be at a certain standard of a lack of control and a lack of individual responsibility that should make him the ward of the state temporarily. And you can do this with a lot of checks and balances that we could establish. I mean, you can always have, for example, the initial hold be 24 hours and then have him be reevaluated, have the patient be reevaluated after that period, and give them many different opportunities to assert their right to leave, but to reestablish sickness and health as the actual standards, rather than just a violence standard, which has been interpreted far too narrowly, and which has resulted in a lot of lost lives, some of whom have been the victims of people who were not involuntarily committed, but even more often, people who could have been saved, but who went on to commit suicide or to engage in behaviors so dangerous that it cost them their lives.
Are modern institutions up for the demands that this would place on them?
No, I mean, frankly, right now, the mental health system is terribly overtaxed in the United States. It's important to say that this is not just a state level issue. Again, the sort of private community mental health system that we were supposed to be building was never built because no one actually ponied up the money to pay for it. There are some astounding facts out there about the lack of, forget about state hospitals for severe patients, just general psychiatric needs. 2/3 of the counties in the United States do not have a single practicing psychiatrist within them. They do not have a single psychiatrist who is licensed to give psychiatric medicine in 2/3 of the counties. Part of the problem is that when you sort of have this large defunding mandate, as we had for the last 60 years with our psychiatric system, it just appears to be a less sort of attractive field to get into for an ambitious young doctor. It's very important to say that that psychiatrists are paid far worse than plastic surgeons or anesthesiologists or cardiologists or sports medicine doctors, all of whom also have, much more appealing patient populations. So if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. But I should say that the people who oppose what I stand for, which is, expanding the use of involuntary commitment, they also believe in a really desperate need for a dramatic refunding of our psychiatric health system. And what we would need to do is to sort of convince people in the public to understand when you actually look at the amount of money that's spent on the penitentiary systems, where there's just a hideously high number of people with severe mental illness in our prisons, and if you look at the amount of money spent on services for the homeless, we could actually save money by refunding our psychiatric system. So anything that would happen in terms of changing the standard of involuntary care would also have to involve a real effort to fix this problem.
Sounds reasonable, but I wanted to get a medical ethicist point of view on all this. So I talked to medical ethics professor Dominic Sisti. He's from the University of Pennsylvania, and I asked him what he thinks went wrong in the case of Decarlos Brown Jr.
A lot of things went wrong from what I have read. It looks like Mr. Brown was unable to access treatment that would have potentially prevented this tragic, gruesome killing. He apparently was in and out of treatment over the course of the past several years, was also incarcerated multiple times, and from what it sounds like, he fell through the cracks of the very fragmented mental health care system in the United States. Is it fixable? Well, that's another very big question. I think there are things we can do. We know that there are evidence-based interventions that can help individuals like Decarlos Brown. We just have to make access much more easy for folks like Decarlos Brown and his family, who also struggle to get him into treatment. There are a lot of laws in the United States, really depending on the state, but often they set a very high bar for involuntary commitment of individuals who have a mental illness. And it has to be very clear that the person is a threat to themselves or others. When that is unclear, psychiatrists are often left in a really tough spot. They're not really able to predict with a high amount of certainty that somebody is a threat, and so they're not legally able to confine a person in a psychiatric setting. We have a lot of individuals in our jails and prisons in the United States who have serious mental illness. About 30 to 40% of jail and prison inmates suffer with one or more mental illness. This is out of 3 million people. The United States incarcerates the most people per capita in the world. And this is where individuals with serious mental illnesses often end up because they can't access care in therapeutic settings. So their symptoms get worse. The ultimate, I think, solution is to have an actual mental health care system, which the United States really does not have, where people can easily access care at any point in a continuum, from outpatient treatment and therapy all the way out to intensive inpatient type therapies. And for folks like Mr. Decarlos Brown, psychiatric inpatient care is really important, and we really just don't have the capacity anymore. There was a time when there were about 100 beds per 100,000 psychiatric beds available. Now we're down to about 20 or 30 per 100,000 in the United States. And that's just not sufficient to meet the demand and the needs of our most vulnerable citizens.
Why aren't people forced into treatment if they're not necessarily a threat, but they are struggling with their mental health and are incapable of making rational decisions?
So that's a great question. I mean, I think if they are incapable of making these decisions, there should be a way, much like a person, say, with dementia, right? We wouldn't allow an elderly person to wander the streets with dementia in the cold, in the snow. We would take them in and we would convince them that if they didn't want to go to a shelter or inside, that they had to go inside. There's a legacy of mistreatment, obviously, of individuals with psychiatric conditions. Back when the old asylums existed, many people with serious mental illness were just warehoused there and left to kind of languish. And through deinstitutionalization and the patients' rights movement, we recognize now that individuals with mental illness retain their civil liberties and their rights up until a point when they become dangerous to others or to themselves, and that can be shown clearly. But that's really not always easy to show. And so we err on the side of civil liberties in many cases, and that's often the problem. Now, in this case, I don't know that actually was the problem. It sounds more like everyone knew that he was dangerous and they just couldn't access the right level of care for him and keep him in treatment. So the steps that were needing to be taken were taken in many cases, but the capacity of the system was just not there.
And that's it for Planet America's Weekend Edition this week. We'll be back at the same time next week, right here on ABC News.
Our next edition is on ABC TV at 9:35 p.m. on Monday, and both shows are available on ABC, iView, YouTube, and Facebook. See you there.
Bye-bye.